In retelling the story of Dunkirk, Nolan couldn't escape the fact that the event was technically a retreat. At this point in the war in 1940, Axis forces had taken so much of France that the Allies felt their best course of action was to pull back and regroup for a better defense against the Nazis' inevitable attack on the British homeland. In the small coastal town of Dunkirk, close to the Belgian border, this evacuation was met with relentless assault by well-supplied German forces, intent on decimating their numbers before they could set foot off the European continent. Having cultivated an effective cross-cutting technique throughout his previous work, Nolan desired to employ it towards the whole of a feature-length narrative, in effect creating one long note of sustained suspense that he described as the story of immediate tension in the present tense. Right away, this suggested that the director would have to eschew his tendencies towards increasingly inflated runtimes and zero in on the most concise, succinct version of the narrative at hand. Indeed, at an hour and 45 minutes, Dunkirk is Nolan's shortest feature film since Following. The film is split up into three distinct planes of action: the air, the sea, and the ground, referred to in the film as the mole, so named after the dock jutting out from the beach. Each of these separate strands duck and weave through each other, only to converge at the end as the battle reaches a fever pitch. Dunkirk takes a decentralized approach to its plot, trashing the idea of a singular protagonist in favor of enigmatic figureheads, fictional composites instead of historical accounts. They have names, to be sure, but we as an audience don't have the luxury of time to learn them when our very survival is at stake. I say our survival because Nolan intends for these characters to simply serve as windows through which audiences can immerse themselves in the sweep of history as it actively unfolds. We never see beyond this limited subjective perspective. We're stuck with the Allied forces on the ground, forced to flee with them as chaos and destruction surrounds us. We rarely even see the attackers, save for the occasional German fighter plane. In casting Dunkirk, Nolan mostly ignores his reputation as a director of prestigious Academy Award-nominated talent in favor of casting young unknowns like Finn Whitehead, who anchors the mole sequences as the boyish and doggedly determined grunt Tommy, so named not for a specific person, but for the era's slang term for a rank-and-file British soldier. Whitehead's story is one of sheer survival, desperately grabbing for any toehold to safety like a rat fleeing a flood. One of his companions in this regard is a fellow soldier named Alex, played by world-renowned pop singer Harry Styles in his first major acting role. Interestingly enough, Nolan reportedly wasn't aware of Styles' fame at the time, having thought he had cast a young unknown off the strength of his talents like he had done for Whitehead. Styles nevertheless proves more than capable, readily eschewing any pretense of rock star glamour or vanity in order to fit in with the desperation and grit that surrounds him. The sea-based sequences illustrate one of England's crowning moments of the entire war, in which a small fleet of civilian pleasure cruisers sailed across the English Channel and directly into harm's way to help evacuate their countrymen in uniform. Dunkirk zeroes in on the journey of the Moonstone, a tiny boat captained by Mark Rylance's Mr. Dawson. He courageously charts a treacherous course to Dunkirk with both his son and his son's best friend in tow, only to find himself in a contained chamber drama when he picks up a lone, PTSD-riddled soldier caught adrift in open water. Played by longtime Nolan collaborator Cillian Murphy, the shivering soldier, as he's credited in the titles, is hell-bent on getting back to England, and his combative response to Dawson's insistence on keeping the course leads to drama just as unpredictable and dangerous as the battle they're sailing into.
Hold me down, mate!
The last third of Dunkirk's triptych of narratives finds Tom Hardy as a hyper-focused RAF pilot named Farrier, expertly blasting German fighter planes out of the sky in his Spitfire. That is, until he runs low on fuel and risks having to ditch out behind enemy lines. Another member of Nolan's loyal repertoire of performers, Hardy was no doubt selected in part because of his uniquely expressive eyes, an absolute necessity when the character's face must be hidden behind a bulky flight mask for the majority of the picture. Hardy had previously accomplished this same task for Nolan as the menacing masked brute Bane in 2012's The Dark Knight Rises, and achieves in Dunkirk a similar effect, albeit one that's better calibrated to his character's stoic heroism. It's also in Hardy's storyline that one finds the film's most cleverly disguised cameo, Michael Caine, who just barely manages to add another link in his unbroken chain of successive performances for Nolan dating back to Batman Begins, by lending his iconic voice to the role of an officer dispatching commands over the two-way radio.
Stay down at 500 feet to lead fuel for 40-minute fighting time over Dunkirk.
Out of a cast of literally hundreds, Jack Lowden, Barry Keoghan, Tom Glynn Carney, and fellow director Kenneth Branagh deliver standout performances, with Branagh's turn as Commander Bolton serving as a particularly compelling reminder of the dignified composure exhibited by the Allied brass, even as the world was falling down around them. With Interstellar, Nolan borrowed liberally from the Steven Spielberg school of filmmaking, adopting several of his predecessor's stylistic affectations to imbue the unknowable majesty of space and our cosmic connectivity with a sense of overwhelming wonder and awe. Spielberg has similarly influenced the war genre, with his 1998 classic Saving Private Ryan providing the aesthetic and emotional benchmark for subsequent war pictures to follow. While Dunkirk shares inevitable similarities to Saving Private Ryan in a stylistic sense, Nolan charts his own course, fashioning a visceral experience that speaks to his own impeccable technical pedigree, as well as his desire to reinvent the visual language of whatever genre he is working in. This is evident in the initial references he drew inspiration from. One might expect to see a list of iconic war films, but Nolan draws from a wider, diversified pool of sources. All Quiet on the Western Front and the Battle of Algiers appropriately conveyed the chaos of battle to his collaborators, but other works like The Wages of Fear, Alien, Speed, Foreign Correspondent, and Sunrise asserted themselves as genre exercises in sustained suspense or unique applications of montage. Sunrise, a 1927 silent classic by German director F.W. Murnau, proved to be a key reference for Dunkirk, with the narrative challenges inherent in the absence of sound demonstrated for the benefit of the film's ambitions as an almost exclusively visual work. Towards this end, Nolan also looked to the influence of other silent-era directors like Cecil B. DeMille for his handling of epic spectacle and large crowds. Dunkirk retains the stark, austere visuals that Nolan is known for, adopting his signature metal and earth tone color palette, while photochemically boiling his chromatic spectrum down to a limited range of cold blues, teals, and grays. The gloomy daylight that hangs over the English Channel takes on a creamy tinge, as it provides the key light for a naturalistic, yet foreboding presentation. It's only a matter of time until Nolan succeeds in making an entire picture with large format photography like IMAX, and Dunkirk naturally represents Nolan's most ambitious effort to date towards that goal. Working once again with his interstellar cinematographer Hoyte van Hoytema, Nolan and Hoytema use a blend of large format 65mm and IMAX film. Nolan captures this overwhelming, all-consuming chaos with his signature epic flair, blending majestic classical camera work with urgent handheld photography that ably evokes the war-is-hell tonality of Saving Private Ryan, while still asserting an aesthetic character all its own. Nolan's love of aerial photography works particularly well in this regard, bringing a seasoned and enthusiastic energy to Dunkirk's Dramamine-necessitating dogfight sequences. The film as a whole naturally acts as the latest showcase of Nolan's advocacy for the supremacy of celluloid's organic grit over digital's glossy sheen, putting the format's resiliency to the test many times over. One particular instance would involve the loss of an IMAX camera when the plane it was mounted to accidentally sunk to the bottom of the sea. While the camera was, understandably, toast, the film inside was not. Indeed, the hardy archival qualities of celluloid meant that not only was the footage usable, it was pristine. While the film is stuffed to the brim with the epic spectacle we've come to expect from Nolan's filmography, there's also a curious tonal intimacy at play, a touch of the avant-garde that allows Dunkirk to function as both a compelling dramatization of a historical event, as well as an abstract meditation on industrial-scale survival. The bulk of Dunkirk was shot in the locations where these events actually happened, most notably on the very same beach where soldiers lined up to board evacuation boats as German bombs fell around them. Nolan's longtime production designer Nathan Crowley even rebuilt the mole from the original blueprints. Even when the production moved to the waters off of Holland, or a water tank in Los Angeles for select sequences, the crew dedicated themselves to historical accuracy in the details, right down to the last steel rivet. At the same time, his treatment of landscape reduces his backdrops to two planes of action, above and below. The shared horizon line that bisects his frame ties the mole, sea, and air narratives together with thematic uniformity, but it also has the effect of abstractifying the action into an interior realm. This impression goes a long way towards explaining why Nolan felt the need to accumulate more experience and clout before embarking on production. Especially within the calculated cynicism of today's studio climate, he wouldn't have been able to make Dunkirk as the impressionistic survival and courage allegory that he did, at the level of production value he did, and with a mostly young and unknown cast, unless he himself was the brand that guaranteed a healthy return on investment. It takes a great deal of experience and confidence to underdevelop his characters in the manner he does here. It goes against every artistic grain in our bodies, indeed everything we've been taught about writing story. However, Nolan recognized that the Battle of Dunkirk was a much bigger story than any one person, and that the most effective version of any film recreation would be the one that captured the shared humanity of its participants while installing key avatars through which the audience could immerse itself fully and share in the experience. This is something that cinema does better than almost any other established or emerging medium, and Nolan recognizes this. It's why he eschews cheap gimmickry like 3D in favor of large film formats that quite literally fill the audience's field of view. It's why he avoids the uncanny plastic sheen of digital and embraces the organic warmth and texture of celluloid. True immersion demands as few barriers between the image and the audience as possible, and Dunkirk succeeds in this regard due to Nolan's artistic precision as well as the subtle, abstract touch he brings to the proceedings. Nowhere is Nolan's avant-garde touch more evident than Dunkirk's original score, composed by longtime music collaborator Hans Zimmer in partnership with Benjamin Wallfisch and Lorne Balfe, among others. Zimmer and Wallfisch's foreboding suite of cues are anything but subtle, evoking the dark belly of the military-industrial beast that was World War II. Limited melodies compete for air against an expressive industrial texture, with an arrangement of string and brass instruments manipulated so as to recall the alarming whine of an approaching fighter plane, or the listless whir of a ship engine as it teeters onto its side. Simply put, the score is an unrelenting juggernaut of abstract musicality, made all the more intense by Zimmer's deployment of the Shepard tone, an auditory illusion that Zimmer previously used a similar effect on The Prestige and in the Joker's theme for The Dark Knight, wherein a sense of escalating danger is implied by a tone whose pitch seems to escalate towards infinity without breaking. The effect is one of squirming tension on the part of the listener, an auditory twisting of the knife that corkscrews the anxious feeling in our stomachs, like waiting for the beat to drop at a rave in hell. As he did previously on Interstellar, Zimmer also synthesizes the sound of Nolan's ticking pocket watch and lays it down as a bedrock of Dunkirk's score. As if the music wasn't intense enough, the tick-tick-tick sound of time literally dripping away amplifies the desperate intensity of Dunkirk's tone, while conveying to the audience just how close the world came to an Axis occupation of the United Kingdom, if it hadn't been for the courageous spirit and dogged resistance of its people. Indeed, time, the device of the ticking clock, unifies with the thematic whole of Dunkirk, placing the film as an exploratory apex within Nolan's career. Again, the story essentially functions as one large escape sequence. In the capable hands of Nolan's longtime editor Lee Smith, this exercise in narrative minimalism becomes another form in which Nolan can actively manipulate the bounds, indeed the very shape, of time itself. Since his very first feature, Nolan has actively utilized cinema's unique ability to convey sophisticated storytelling through non-linear structure. His primary tool in this regard is the crosscut, which he's employed throughout his filmography to tremendous effect. Whereas Nolan's previous films tend to use the crosscut to add emotional heft to key narrative sequences, Dunkirk basically functions as a feature-length string of crosscuts. Rather than numbing his audience to its effects, Nolan instead seems to reach a new level of complexity and sophistication with his approach to montage here. Each component of the story's organizational triptych, the mole, the sea, and the air, takes place over a different time span, a week, a day, and 1 hour respectively. By dovetailing these sequences into each other as one seemingly continuous event, Nolan effortlessly compresses and expands time at will. Admittedly, this is a rather large leap of artistic license on Nolan's part, especially when so much attention is otherwise paid to historical accuracy within the frame. But Nolan's approach nonetheless captures the harrowing emotional truth of the battle. The fractured chronological presentation also allows the story to revisit key moments from earlier in the film, revealing different perspectives that deepen our understanding of the big picture. One such moment is the scene where Ferrier's co-pilot ditches into the sea. From Ferrier's perspective in the air, it looks like a stable, almost peaceful water landing. Assured of his colleague's safety, Ferrier jets off to another part of the battle. From his co-pilot's perspective, however, it's a very different story. Beyond the rattling impact of the crash landing, the cabin quickly fills up with water, and he can't open the glass cockpit to escape. Dunkirk is filled with moments like these, moments that convey a complex, dueling subjectivity that amplifies as the various timelines intersect and collide with each other. Nolan's creative subversion of chronology is easily the most visible signifier of his authorship, but is far from the only one. Dunkirk abounds with displays of Nolan's secondary artistic signatures, like his fascination with functional style as embodied in the military uniforms seen throughout, or Ferrier's on-the-fly calculations about his fuel consumption, pointing to the director's use of math and physics as a storytelling tool. However, what immediately sets Dunkirk apart from other films of its ilk is the sheer weight of the picture. Nolan's previous films all boast a visceral heft to their impact, a palpable gravity to match their monumental ambitions. This impression is due in large part to Nolan's dogged insistence on practical, old-fashioned filmmaking that demands everything that can be captured in camera will be captured in camera. Famously averse to the reliance on CGI that stains the films of some of his contemporaries, Nolan commands an intimidating array of practical resources that give Dunkirk its distinct feeling of inescapable danger. Make no mistake, the ability to make a film at this scale with the resources he demands is a luxury, a direct benefit of his status as a certified moneymaker and pop culture icon. Fortunately, Nolan makes these demands always in service to his story, and not his vanity. Dunkirk finds Nolan's deployment of practical effects reaching new levels of challenge, necessitating the director to alter how he conducted his own set in order to create a truly immersive environment for the audience. For instance, he went so far as to have members of his own crew dress up in the military costumes worn by the extras, so that they could hide in plain sight within the frame as he shot in all directions. He also incorporated old-school techniques to amplify the size of his crowds. Whereas now one can simply copy and paste any number of digital extras into a scene, he and his crew went to the trouble of creating detailed cardboard cutouts of soldiers to put in the far distance of wide shots on the beach. This pursuit of the analog over the digital permeates Dunkirk, creating no shortage of technical challenges for his crew, like, how exactly does one mount an IMX camera to a vintage fighter plane? We should know the answer by now. By quite literally bolting the camera mount to the wing of a specially modified plane, attaching some specialty periscope lenses, and taking that sucker up into the air. Dunkirk's aerial dogfighting sequences boast some of the film's most gripping moments. We can quite literally feel the G-forces pulling on our gut as we bank, roll, and dive with Ferrier's Spitfire. A substantial portion of these scenes were actually shot up in the air, with the actors in the cockpit. Most filmmakers of Nolan's ilk would be happy to throw up a mock cockpit in front of a green screen and call it a day, but his insistence on in-camera visual effects makes for footage that drips with hyper-realism. In Nolan's hands, the mounted camera becomes a powerful tool for visual storytelling, generating intense POV shots as well as the kind of surreal images that only cinema can conjure. A standout shot finds the camera mounted sideways to the deck of a ship as it rolls over towards the water. But since the deck is fixed to a stationary point within the frame, the sea appears to coalesce into an intimidating wall of water that rises up to swallow the boat whole. In a filmography devoted to the study of heroes in action, Dunkirk offers a very different portrait of heroism. An earnest, quiet courage and hopeful resilience that stands in stark contrast to the theatrical superheroics of the Dark Knight trilogy. In this way, Dunkirk represents something so much more than the director's latest technical tour de force. Rather, it represents an evolution, an artistic maturation of an intensely cerebral filmmaker at the peak of his powers.